Abracadabra, an unpublished work by Bailey A. Osborne. Chapter 2. Telescope. A telescope is an instrument that allows people to see distant objects. Telescopes are important tools in astronomy. For almost 2 months after her birthday, Abra waited patiently for Stellan to consider a trip to Solu. She woke up in the morning, ate breakfast with her brother, and walked with him to the shop, saying hello to their neighbors along the way. If Abra made a thermos of lemon ginger tea to take with them, she would share it with the old man who sold eggs on the corner and the woman with gray hair who lived across the street from the shop. "Good morning, Harmony," Abra would greet her. "I made some of the tea you taught me how to make." Harmony would take the tea with a smile and a soft murmur of gratitude, then watch Abra until she disappeared inside the shop. Periodically over the years, Abra had been a student in her kitchen, learning all sorts of wonderful mysteries and committing them to memory. Other than that, Abra rarely saw the woman. Working never kept Abra very busy, so she did her best not to be impatient. Not many people needed a second-hand store in a small village where everyone knew everyone. But sometimes people would bring in things left to them by relatives that lived elsewhere, or when they cleaned out a basement or attic. Those were Abra's favorite times, and she would sit and sort through boxes for hours, marveling over each item and wondering where it came from. If something spoke to her, she would set it to the side. Only the things that felt the most magnetic to her soul ended up in her treasure box, though. Abra woke up in the middle of November and smiled at the sky. The fact that she couldn't remember the name of a single star hardly bothered her. At breakfast, she saw Stellan with dark circles under his eyes. He spoke in grunts and lifted eyebrows, but watched her closely. Usually, Stellan being moody would irritate Abra, but that day she just smiled at him and dished him a bowl of porridge. When she came out of her room, dressed for the day, Stellan stopped her. "You feeling okay?" he asked, putting the back of his hand against her forehead. "Yes." Abra laughed at him. "Why? I haven't been sick in ages." Before Stellan could censor himself, his face betrayed his surprise at her words. The siblings stood in the middle of the room, staring at each other, neither of them knowing what to say. Something inside of Abra twisted anxiously, and she took a step forward toward her brother. "You're right," said Stellan, swallowing hard. He patted her on the shoulder and nodded at the door. "Let's go." Suddenly, everything felt just a tiny bit off to Abra. She walked silently beside her brother, going back over her memories. But everything had been normal? Hadn't she sat around the kitchen table with Shepard and Stellan the night before, laughing over funny stories? Abra glanced to her right and saw Stellan's dark circles again. He hadn't looked that tired the night before. "Are you sure I'm not sick?" Abra asked Stellan as they turned the last corner before they reached his shop. "Do you feel sick?" Stellan asked, stopping to stare at her closely. "No," said Abra, and she didn't. She felt normal, except for something tugging at the back of her mind that perhaps she missed something. "Let me know if you need me," said Stellan, after he unlocked the front door and let them in. He rubbed his hands together, warming them up before turning on the cash register and leaving Abra to her tasks. "Okay." Abra tried to give him a reassuring smile, but he looked too tired to notice. As Abra swept and tidied the few things that had been moved from their places, she thought hard about how she felt. Flashes of memories from the past came to mind. Brief instances where both Stellan and Shepard would flutter around her, anxious for seemingly no reason. Abra thought about her sickness and how it had affected her memories. She had been told the sickness hadn't done any more damage since high school, but had they been lying to her? How would I even know? Abra asked herself, putting the broom back into the closet. Behind the counter by the cash register, Abra found her new journal that Stellan had given her for her birthday. She opened it, deciding she would start it while she waited for customers. To her surprise, the first page already had her handwriting on it. The entry consisted of only a couple lines and the date, November 10th. "Maybe I'm only stuck because I allow myself to be stuck. What would happen if I let go of the brakes and let myself fly the way I dream of?" That was all. One sentence and one question. Most of the time, Abra filled her journals with lists of things she had memorized, or words in other languages, anything she could think of to prove that her memory still worked. Shepard's older brother, Sergeant Lee, had suggested it to her after she realized she couldn't remember the stars. She rarely used the journal she received from her brother to record her thoughts or feelings. Recipes and riddles? Yes. Existential thoughts and queries? Never. Despite the oddness of the entry, Abra didn't think it had anything to do with whether or not she had been sick. She read the word several times before picking up a pen and clicking it open. Deciding to keep with the theme, Abra penned her feelings. I think perhaps my sickness is worse than I've been told. It makes me feel a little crazy, feeling perfectly fine while seeing my brother look at me like I'm about to fall apart. What happens in the blank spaces of my memory when I don't even realize the blank spaces exist? Do they exist, or am I actually crazy? Putting down the pen, Abra glanced at the calendar to check the date. Her eyes widened with realization. November 21st, 11 days after the first entry. For a moment she struggled to remember which day she thought it had been. No, I'm being silly. I just lost track of time. I knew it was the 21st. Abra closed the journal and placed it back where she found it. Sitting down in the chair behind the counter, Abra settled in to wait for her first customer of the day. On the shelf behind her, a small radio played the only station that reached the village, and Abra hummed along with the familiar tunes. Music didn't mean much to her, other than a way to fill empty space. Sometimes Shepard would burst out into song, his tenor voice belting out words and melodies that made Abra laugh, but she never did. She never thought to. Halfway through the morning, the door to the store opened, and Abra sat up eagerly. She saw a stranger and gave him a bright smile and a cheery good morning. His eyes landed on her face, and his mouth turned up into a smile. For a moment he stood frozen in the doorway, their eyes locked. Then, giving himself a shake, the young man hurried to step inside and shut the door behind him. Hi, Abra, he said, and his voice sounded smooth and unfamiliar. With a confused tilt of her head, Abra stared at the man. He had beautifully angular eyes and high cheekbones that had gone red from the cold. Though dressed in a long black coat that hid most of his frame, Abra saw narrow shoulders and long thin legs. In his eyes she perceived the recognition, even as she knew she had never seen him before in her life. She would never have forgotten a face like that. Someone must have told you my name, she said with an airy laugh, since I'm not wearing a name tag, and I don't think we've ever met. The man's expression changed ever so slightly to show he didn't understand. Putting on a polite smile, the man took a few steps closer. You don't remember me? He asked with a squint of his dark eyes. I met you in Solu last week. Hearing the name of the city sent a jolt through Abra's body. She had forgotten about it until that moment, and then it all came crashing back. The desire to visit, the pictures she had stared at in magazines and newspapers, the fact that Shepard went every weekend to see a girl. Catching her balance by putting a hand on the counter, Abra did her best to return his smile with one of her own. Are you sure it was me? She kept her tone bright and happy, but the tugging at the back of her mind grew louder, more insistent. Solu, Solu, Solu. The name whirled faster and faster inside her thoughts until there came a flash of something, something vague. A feeling? An image? Yes, Solu. But she hadn't gone. It had been a dream. That's right. She had had a dream about visiting Solu. How could she have forgotten that? She hadn't dreamed in years. I'm pretty sure. The man shifted uncertainly. You look just like someone I met named Abra. Huh. The light-hearted noise belied the heaviness Abra felt growing in her stomach. What a coincidence. I guess so. He looked away then, for the first time since their eyes met, and he took in his surroundings. Stellan redid the shop when Abra turned 17. He never really explained why, just told her he needed to change everything for the sake of the business. Business or lack thereof didn't really change after the remodel, but Stellan seemed satisfied and left Abra to manage the tall shelves of houseware items and racks of clothing. There were bins of toys and stacks of books and crates of odds and ends that didn't really belong anywhere or could belong to anyone. Even though Abra kept things tidy, she liked the slightly overfull feel of the room, how some things just fit better draped over the back of the couch or leaning against a vanity that hadn't sold in the past 5 years. Can I help you find anything? Abra asked, putting on her customer service smile. Maybe a pair of gloves? He turned his eyes back to her. Do you have any? Yeah, right over there on the back shelf. Abra motioned towards the winterwear. Ah, the man took a step, then hesitated. Right back here. Abra came out from behind the counter and led the way. She felt the man, rather than saw him, when he joined her. Moving out of the way, Abra gave him another smile, trying to put them both at ease. What size do you need? Oh, I guess. Pulling his hand out of the pocket of his coat, the man stretched out 5 long fingers. Bigger than mine, said Abra, placing her palm against his before she even realized what she had done. Heat filled her cheeks, and she hid them by busying herself with the gloves, sifting through the pile to look for a man's pair that could fit the stranger's hand. Do you care what color? What color do you suggest? The question took Abra off guard, and she felt her mind spin a little. She remembered more of her dream about Solu. Fish cakes, mint tea, steam that had felt so real she woke up sweating in her bed. She used to have dreams like that in the beginning, after Sergeant Lee started treating her for her sickness. Vivid dreams that woke her up screaming as she struggled to run for her life. She would hear laughter that made her sob, and feel hands holding her own so tightly that her palms were red in the morning. But then Sergeant Lee switched up her doses, and the dreams stopped. Not just the vivid dreams, but all of them. A small price to pay for the relief of undisturbed slumber. Abra? A soft touch on her shoulder startled her, and she whirled around. Yes, sorry. Abra had a pair of black gloves in her hand, and she held them out to him. Try these. Carefully he pulled them on. He nodded at her. They fit. Oh, good! Abra forgot about her dream, pleased that she had helped her customer find what he needed. Is there anything else that you need? No, this is all. The man spotted the proud look on Abra's face and hid a small smile. A good pair of gloves is an essential item to have in the winter, said Abra, leading them back to the checkout counter. While she slid behind it, the stranger stood in front, the gloves in one hand and a credit card in his other. Wow, a credit card! What? The man watched her type the price of the gloves into the computer. We don't have many people pay with card here. Abra gave him a smile. But don't worry, we have a card reader. Taking the card, Abra positioned the card reader between them on the counter and turned it on. While waiting for the system to connect, the man waited silently. Curious, Abra's eyes flickered to the name on the card. Zan? She read before looking up at him. He nodded, another polite smile on his face. Zan. Abra said it again. I like it. Zan swallowed hard and nodded, staring down at the counter where his gloves lay. A quiet beep came from the card reader, and Abra slid the card down the slot. Noticing his quiet and somber demeanor, Abra tried to smile brighter as she handed him back his card with both hands and a slight bow of respect. Thank you for coming in, she said, just as she had been taught to say by Stellan when he retrained her after she lost her memories. Have a good day. You too. Zan's hands were cold when their fingers brushed. Picking up the gloves before Abra could hand those to him as well, Zan quickly turned around to leave. Come again, she called after him. At the door, Zan paused and glanced at her over his shoulder. His expression seemed conflicted. Was he smiling at her or grimacing? Abra couldn't tell. Did he feel slighted because he thought he knew her? Had he come all the way from Solu to see her? How? Abra wondered, watching him through the window as he walked briskly across the street and climbed into a dark blue car. She sat back down in her chair and leaned her chin on the palm of her hand. Maybe he had come to the store before and met her then and just had the timing confused? But even that possibility held its own weight. That would mean that she had forgotten something new for the first time in years. Strangers were few and far between in Yotoko, and Abra had always been good with faces. Today has been such a strange day, said Abra out loud to herself. She thought about the entry in her journal that she had no memory of writing, Stellan's dark circles, and Zan's bold claim of seeing her in Solu. One on their own could have been easily shaken away as mindless and inconsequential, but all three. Rubbing her hands up and down her arms in an attempt to comfort herself, she pressed against the inside of her elbow and let out a gasp of pain. Carefully, she used the tips of her fingers to press again, inching her way inward until she felt the tender spot of what felt like a bruise. For a moment, Abra didn't move, her thoughts rushing through her mind like water in a waterfall. It could be nothing, she told herself, but she knew that feeling. For the past 6 years, she had been careful to baby the inside of her elbow, washing the skin with warm water and applying lavender and honey if it ever grew sore. During the summer months, she took more care, knowing that her arms were visible to the world. Even when her skin did become red or irritated, it had never felt that tender. A bruise on any other part of her body could have been ignored without a second thought, but the inside of her elbow meant one thing. Slowly and with shaky fingers, Abra rolled up her sleeve and revealed the inside of her right elbow. Her hand went to her mouth at the sight of the purple mottled skin and the tiny pinpricks of red that hadn't been there the day before. How did I miss this while I was getting dressed? Clamping her eyes shut, Abra tried to argue with herself. She knew that one conversation could answer all her questions, but she also knew that person lied. He only meant to keep her safe, so Abra let him. But how many days had passed without her knowing? She tried to count the needle marks, but they were too many too close together. Before she could think too much or too hard, she snatched up her journal and wrote down the strange things that had happened. A dream, a stranger who knew her name, an arm bruised from an overdose of doses. After clicking the pen off, Abra closed her eyes and told herself to breathe. We've always known it was possible for the sickness to get worse someday, she thought as she opened her eyes again and stared down at her arm. We've always known this might happen. Abra never thought she would have to consider what that would look like at the age of barely 23, but she had to be thankful for almost 7 years of peace. She didn't remember how bad it had been before Sergeant Lee found the medicine she took to keep her sickness at bay. But Stellan told her often she should be thankful she didn't remember. Contemplating the distinct possibility that she might lose her new memories of her happy life with her brother and friend scared her. When was the last time I felt afraid? Abra wondered, unrolling her sleeve and covering the evidence that time had passed without her. Again. Taking a deep breath, Abra stood to her feet and walked over to the door to flip the sign to close. Then, with steady, purposeful steps, she walked down the hallway to Stellan's office. Even as she walked, she wondered what difference it would make if she knew or not. Would knowing fix anything? Would it take away the grief from Shepard and Stellan and give it to her? Perhaps it's my turn to feel it for once, Abra told herself as she lifted her hand to knock on her brother's door. The frosted glass under her knuckles made a rattling sound. She couldn't see anything through the window other than lights and shadows. Usually she only went back to Stellan's office when she needed her doses, or if he needed her help cleaning something. He had never said she couldn't go back there. She just never thought about it. Come in, Stellan called. He lifted his head and smiled at her when she peered in around the door. You good? Yeah, said Abra, not knowing how to say no. She shut the door behind her and kept a smile on her face as she walked across the office to stand by her brother's wide wooden desk. She had to stand more to the left side to make sure his giant computer monitor didn't block her from view. Stellan always kept his things neat and organized. All the lines in his office looked straight and clean. The lines on the black carpet that covered the cement floor, the lines of the LED lights that lit up the room, the lines of the 4 tall cabinets along the back wall. Even the padlocks on the handles were straightened to look uniform. The clock on the wall showed the time as 11:30. Abra still had 30 minutes before she would need her dose. The thought made her put a hand protectively over the bruise on her arm. Noticing, concern sprang into Stellan's eyes. What happened? Does it hurt? He stood to his feet and walked around the desk. As professional as his office looked, and despite being almost 30, he still dressed the part of an early 20-something about to go play sports. And even though he dressed mostly in athletic wear, he kept his clothes tidy and clean. Yeah, Abra's voice came out a whisper. Does it? Where? How bad? Stellan took her arm carefully in his hands and lifted her sleeve. He sucked in his breath between his teeth when he saw the red and purple skin. It does look worse than yesterday. Leading her over to the black couch that sat against the wall of the room, Stellan never took his eyes from his sister's arm. After sitting her down, he hurried over to a deep drawer in his desk where Abra knew he kept her doses and other things related to her sickness. She had looked inside only a couple of times. Usually Stellan had her dose ready and waiting on his desk before she came in at noon to find him. When he returned to the couch, he had Abra's lavender and honey salve and a bandage. We'll use your other arm for your dose today, okay? said Stellan. His hands were gentle as he took Abra's arm again and massaged the sweet-smelling salve into her injured skin. I should have been thinking about it when I was giving you your doses, but your right arm is closest when you're laying in bed. I had to have extra doses? Abra watched Stellan, holding still like the good patient she had always tried to be for him. Stellan said nothing, but he nodded, his mouth pressing down at the corners. When he finished applying the salve, he took the white bandage and wrapped it around Abra's arm. After using the length of bandage, he tucked in the end and gave it a small pat. He looked up at his sister and gave her a brave smile. There, that should help. He stood up again to put his things away. Why didn't you tell me I was sick when I said something about it this morning? Abra asked quietly, her fingers running over the edge of white fabric meant to help her body heal. What good would it do for you to remember? Stellan watched her from beside his desk. He had his hands tucked under his arms, a habit he had had since he had been in high school. Abra remembered. Somehow. I don't want you to remember things like that, Abra. But what if something important happens? She met eyes with him and saw the way he frowned at the apprehension on her face. She waited for him to rejoin her on the couch and put a steady hand on her shoulder before asking her next question. Is my sickness getting worse? I told you I wouldn't let that happen, didn't I? Stellan held her gaze. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. But what happens when I start forgetting more things? Abra's words tripped over the lump in her throat, and she saw Stellan's jaw clench as his grip on her shoulder tightened. What happens when I start dreaming again? Are you dreaming again? Stellan's face paled just enough for Abra to notice. She nodded. It's okay. I'm not going to let anything happen to you, said Stellan as he pulled her into a hug. He smelled like home, in safety, and lemon ginger tea. Leaning her head on his shoulder, Abra let out a deep breath. Why had she been scared? She felt Stellan stop breathing for a moment and wondered if he held his breath to pray. When she felt his lungs move again, she said a silent amen and sat up. Stellan ran a hand over her hair and hid his worry and the grief behind a well-worn mask. I'm going to call Lee and have him come give you a checkup, okay? Abra nodded again. Only Stellan called the sergeant by his last name. That was his right as Sergeant Lee's high school best friend. You look tired. You should go home and rest, said Stellan as he stood up and walked over to his phone. I'll call Shepard to come take you home. Abra didn't argue. She would have stayed at the shop if Stellan had let her, but what good would it have done? She probably wouldn't have any other customers anyway. Her mind reminded her of the young man who had bought gloves and known her name. Zan. She pulled his name back out of her memories and remembered his features. She thought, for the second time that day, that it would be impossible to have forgotten a face like his. While waiting for Shepard, Abra sat on Stellan's couch. He brought her a glass of water, and she sipped on it as she watched him type things on his computer. She had known he had computers, and he spent most of his day on them, but she had never thought to ask what he did on them. Whatever it was, he seemed very concentrated on it. What are you doing? Abra asked curiously. Me? Stellan seemed surprised by the question. He forced a little laugh as he looked at her. Just doing some work. What work? My job, Abra, said Stellan, giving her a slightly bewildered tilt of his head. The same job I've had for the past 10 years. Oh. The answer sounded funny to Abra in a way that didn't make her want to laugh at all. She had known he didn't really do much at the shop, but she hadn't realized he had a different occupation entirely. It seemed stupid to just be realizing it now, but really, Abra had never thought about it. His office was at the shop. Surely that meant the shop was his work. Before she could get swept up in the details, Shepard's voice came from the hallway, announcing his arrival. His voice sounded upbeat, but the second he entered the room, she recognized the tension that came with him. Looking from her friend to her brother, Abra felt the chill between them. What if something important happens? Abra had asked Stellan. What if something happened to the two most important people in her world, and she didn't know? Would her mind betray her that tragically as to not let her keep her loved ones? Can we stop for noodles before we go home? Abra asked her friend, jumping up from the couch as she shook the terrifying thoughts from her mind. I'm craving noodles. Me too, said Shepard with a smile, avoiding Stellan's heavy gaze. Let's go. Wait, Abra. Stellan's words stopped her halfway to the door. He glanced up at the clock, then opened the big drawer in his desk. It's almost noon. Let me give you your dose before you leave. I'll wait for you out front, said Shepard, all traces of happiness wiped from his face. Okay. Abra walked back to her brother. At first she forgot and began to push up the sleeve on her right arm, but Stellan shook his head and tapped on her other elbow. Switching arms, Abra quickly rolled up her sleeve and held out the inside of her elbow to her brother. The process didn't even seem like a medical procedure anymore. Carefully, Stellan used a small antiseptic wipe to clean the skin before puncturing through it with the thin tip of a small needle. The medicine in the tube looked blue and felt cool as it slid into Abra's veins. On cold days, she would give a little shiver as the liquid worked through her body and headed towards her brain. There. Stellan pulled the needle back out and set it on his desk. I'll see you at dinner time. Okay. Abra smiled at him and felt some of the previous feelings of worry and fear dissolve, as if the medicine attacked negative emotions instead of the brain rot that stole her memories. The smile on Abra's face made Stellan's worry fade, and he gave her arm a quick squeeze before returning back to his work. See you later, Stellan. Okay, he called after her. Close the door behind you. Abra found Shepard outside on the sidewalk. He seemed to be staring thoughtfully across the street where Harmony lived, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket. When he heard Abra open the door to join him, he turned around and gave her a wary smile. It grew when Abra gave him a happy wave and skipped over to link arms with him. He gave her face a once-over and nodded, satisfied with the pink in her cheeks and the spring in her step. You ready? He asked. Are you? She asked back, setting a quick pace for the both of them. You better finish your noodles before I'm done with mine, or I'll eat them for you. You want to play Noodle Monster? Asked Shepard with a surprised laugh. I thought you hated that game. I do hate that game. It doesn't sound fun. Abra shook her head. I just want to eat your food. You'll never eat my food. Let's make a bet. Abra looked up at her friend. What kind of bet? If you finish your noodles first, you have to hang out with me this afternoon, and if I finish my noodles first, I get to spend the rest of the day with you. When have you ever finished your noodles before I finished mine? Well, I might today. Abra hugged her friend's arm closer when a chill wind blew against them. I'm ravenous. Who says I'm free this afternoon anyway? Shepard asked. Says me. Abra batted her eyelashes at him, but laughed as well when she felt Shepard's palm on her face gently pushing her away. What else are you going to do? Skip the gym for one day. I have other people in my life besides you. Shepard knocked his hip against her side. I spent all week sitting next to your bed. Maybe I'm tired of you. Yeah, but I don't remember that, said Abra in a less joking voice. When Shepard's expression turned regretful for saying something, Abra squeezed his arm. That's okay, I already knew. Stellan told you? No. Abra shook her head. I figured it out first. He just confirmed it. We thought you might not be able to remember it, said Shepard quietly. Cutting off their conversation as they reached their destination, the two friends unlinked arms, and Shepard held the door open for Abra. A handful of patrons sat in the low-ceilinged dining room around long tables close to the floor. From the front of the room came the natural light of the sun through the line of windows, but Abra and Shepard always found a back corner near the kitchen where the savory smells were the strongest, and warmth from the stove reached through the wall. Go ahead and tell your order to the kitchen, shouted Mr. Kim from the table where he sat playing mahjong with his friends. Allowing Abra to settle at their table, Shepard went to the kitchen by himself to order their food. He stayed by the window while Mrs. Kim dished 2 bowls from the large pot that sat simmering on the stove. With the 2 bowls in hand, Shepard returned and Abra helped him set their food carefully on the table. Before sitting down, he took off his jacket and tossed it on the seat next to him. So, said Abra while they waited for their food to cool, how's the girlfriend? Good. Shepard's face lit up as he concentrated on his food, stirring it with his spoon. Abra loved asking him about his relationship because he always smiled when he spoke about her. She's good. Did you go see her this last weekend? Abra braved a bite of food and burned her tongue. No, I stayed here. Shepard's eyes lifted to his friend only for a second before he returned them to his food. I'll see her this weekend. When will she come to Yotoko to meet us? Abra knew they'd had this conversation before, and she knew it all depended on Stellan, but she couldn't help asking again. Hopefully soon, said Shepard without any hope in his tone. Then he tapped his spoon against the edge of her bowl and asked, Are we racing or what? Abra took the hint and dropped the topic. As she slurped down her noodles, she realized that her being sick probably postponed any type of meeting. When she had had some time to recover, when the bruise on the inside of her elbow faded, she would ask Shepard if they could just tell Stellan that she knew and that she wanted to meet the girl. She didn't have any other family other than the two of them. Whoever married Shepard would become like a sister. It seemed silly to put it off like this. Getting sick probably ruined my chances of going to Solu any time soon, said Abra, setting her bowl back down on the table. She still had some food left, but she had things she wanted to say. Stellan will never let me go now. Shepard took his time chewing the food in his mouth and swallowing it down. When he seemed to have trouble knowing what to say, Abra spoke again. I was pretty sick, huh? Her voice came out quiet. She watched Shepard's face for signs of lying, but she knew he would rather tell her the truth anyway, unless Stellan had made him promise not to say anything. Yeah. Shepard used a napkin to wipe his mouth. Have I ever been sick like that before? She asked. Not since we figured out your doses. Shepard shifted in his chair. I remember in the beginning, that was worse. In the beginning. The dreaded time that set Stellan on edge for eternity and disappeared from Abra's brain without a trace. The time linked to the grief in ways that Abra had never been able to figure out. The time of nightmares and cold sweats and black holes. Looking down at her food, Abra kept quiet for a moment. Your brother is coming, Abra said finally. Stellan said he was going to call and ask him to come check on me. Again? Shepard asked. Again? Abra repeated, blinking at him. He was here for 3 days last week. Shepard's brow creased. I thought you were doing better. Why is Stellan asking him to come back? I didn't know he'd already been here, said Abra, as she realized how silly that sounded. Her mind went to her bruised arm. She cradled it against her body. Stellan's asking him to come because I had a dream while I was sick. I thought you didn't remember being sick. Shepard frowned at her. I don't, but I remember the dream. Sort of. Was it one of the nightmares? Abra finished for him, seeing the worry on his face. No, it was actually a happy dream. I dreamed I visited Solu. You... what? Shepard looked startled. I don't know how I knew it was Solu, said Abra, ignoring the look on his face and keeping her tone light. But you told me that's how dreams work sometimes. You just know things because it's your dream. You told Stellan you dreamed about going to Solu? Shepard asked carefully. I didn't tell him what the dream was about, just that I had had a dream, and I knew that was kind of a big deal. Abra twisted her hands together in her lap, since, it felt really real, like how the nightmares used to feel. Shepard listened to her, chewing the inside of his cheek and staring at a spot on the table. It wasn't a bad dream, Shepard, I promise. Reaching across the table, Abra tried to reassure her friend by giving his hand a squeeze or a pat or anything. He didn't meet her halfway, but stayed in his daze, his eyes growing misty. Are you okay? You're kind of scaring me. I just feel bad, said Shepard, clearing his throat and sniffing before lifting a nearby cup of water to his mouth and taking a big gulp. He set down the cup and cleared his throat again. You want to go to Solu so bad you dreamed about it. Well, I kind of feel like I went after the dream. Abra felt relief at Shepard's words. I had fish cakes, like the ones we ate when we were kids, except the not spicy kind, and I drank mint tea. It had just rained, so the road was wet, and I could see my breath when I breathed. She wanted to give Shepard the details so he could be comforted in the fact that she had felt fine, happy. Watching him, though, Abra couldn't tell if he felt happy for her or not. His face seemed twisted up and confused. Not knowing what to say, Abra picked up her spoon and ate another bite of food. Glad it was a good dream, he said, his voice sounding funny. He took another drink of water. Me too. Abra met eyes with her friend. She saw him note the worry in her expression when she added, Hopefully your brother will find out what's going on and fix it. He always does, said Shepard with a nod. You don't have to worry. Our brothers have always figured everything out. You'd tell me if they didn't, right? Abra kept her tone serious. You'd tell me if things were getting worse, and they just didn't tell me? Would it make you feel better to know? Shepard asked. It would make me feel like less of a child, said Abra. It would make me feel less stuck. Shepard sighed, but he didn't argue with her. Will you tell me why things are tense between you and Stellan if I asked you to? Abra watched Shepard shift uncomfortably in his spot. Abra, if you don't want to tell me, just say that, Shepard. Abra stopped him. Just promise you'll be the person who doesn't lie to me. Okay, I won't lie to you. Shepard gave his friend a genuine nod of his head. Things between Stellan and I are tense because we had an argument about something while you were sick. I'd rather not talk about it. It'll all blow over soon. You know us. We're just stubborn about things. Okay. Abra wanted to press for more details, but she respected Shepard's wishes. Her brain ran through the different possibilities. A girlfriend? The trips to Solu? Shepard's job as a security guard at City Hall? Abra? None of those options really made sense. Are you going to try to finish your food before me or not? Shepard asked, trying to lighten the mood. Abra smiled at him, then lifted her empty bowl of noodles. I already did. I get to spend the rest of the day with you.